Hi everyone. So in this video I want to address the first resurrection in Revelation 20 because I continually get asked about this. And I will say that my understanding of people who misunderstand what this is because they insert some arbitrary object reference point and say it's the first of the resurrections, usually since Christ. It's usually, when it comes down to it, it's the first since Christ. And that would be us as believers, that we're the next people to be resurrected after Christ. So it's usually first since. They will insert this arbitrary word, first since Christ. Obviously, it's not the first resurrection overall. Jesus is the first fruits of the dead. This is a conversation that I always start building a framework out. And I say framework because there's a first and then a second and then a third in the framework in 1 Corinthians 15, where it talks about Jesus. Because he rose, we have a hope of resurrection. And then it gives you a framework, which includes three. Every man in his own order. Christ the first fruits, and afterward they that are Christ at his coming. And then he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule, all authority, and all power. And he must reign until he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy which shall be destroyed is death. There's three resurrections there. And they correlate to Jesus being the first fruits, and then Revelation 20's first resurrection, and Revelation 20's second resurrection. The two resurrections that are part of this framework are discussed in Revelation 20 as pre-kingdom and post-kingdom. It's the first resurrection, which Revelation 20 clearly states belongs solely and exclusively to trib saints and martyrs, which means they will have both come to faith and then died for their faith within the confines of the 7-year 70th week. And then it clearly states also in that chapter that they are the only ones that rise at that time, not anyone else. So if you didn't die as a trib saint and martyr, which means you came to faith and then died for your faith within the confines of the 7-year 70th week, it doesn't pertain to you. It's very clearly stated in this, in Revelation 20, in the details of who participates in that event. And then it says they live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. Yes. Well, you go back to 1 Corinthians 15, he must reign until they have put all enemies under his feet. That's the millennial reign. They live and reign with Christ 1,000 years. Till he hath put all enemies under his feet, the last enemy which shall be destroyed is death. And that's Revelation 20's second resurrection, called the second death. When death and hell are, they cough up everyone in them. The sea gives up the dead, small and great, all unbelievers from all generations, from the foundation of the world to the end of the world, stand before the great white throne, and death and hell are cast into the lake of fire. That is the second death. And everyone whose names were not found written in the book of life was cast into the lake of fire. That is the second death. Now, it's not called second resurrection, even though it is a resurrection, because resurrection connotes to life. And these people are being raised in order to find eternal torment in the lake of fire. It's not death as in cessation, cease to exist. It's death as in the absence of life, the absence of the Spirit who gives life. This is a conversation a lot of people misjudge, I would say, because we tend to look at, in the physical world that we live in, death means cessation. We cease to live. We cease to draw breath. But spirit and soul are eternal. From their inception, they will never have an end, spirit and soul. For people who don't understand this, please begin to understand this. Death is not the end. It's only the beginning of your eternity. It's the death of the mortal life, but the body is in three parts, just like God is triune. Remember, man, Adam, was created in the image of God. 3, body, soul, and spirit. The body is given an expiration date because of sin, but the soul and spirit never are. The purpose of being reborn spiritually is to have your soul saved by God so that your spirit will return to God and it will eventually re-enter and glorify said mortal form, and you'll live forever in your eternal, glorified, incorruptible, immortal form. Right now we are not that, but there's a whole 3-part, 2 are forever, 1's not, but it'll become forever once the Spirit glorifies you, which means the Spirit has to be forever. There's a lot of mistakenness about resurrection and what death actually means and implies. and how limited people view death in scope as just like you cease to exist in the physical when you die. But that's not actually how it's going to work for the eternal purposes, and that's what we learn about in the second death. It's the second resurrection. It's the first resurrection and the second resurrection. Pre-kingdom of believers who came to faith and died for faith in the 70th week, and they're going to live and reign with Christ for 1,000 years. And then post-kingdom, after the 1,000 years are expired, all believers from all ages are going to stand before the great white throne. They're going to be resurrected, given life, and then they're going to die. And this isn't a cessation. This is an eternal torment in a form that cannot cease to exist. So they're going to be given a form that can't actually die, only to live life absent of life, which is what death is. It's life absent of life. And the Holy Spirit gives you life. So there's a whole eternal spiritual conversation here that people who think cessation, the spirit and the soul just cease. No. And if that was the case, it wouldn't be too important for you to believe in Jesus, because you would just cease to exist. Why would you care? You wouldn't. Why do you need him? You wouldn't. You would just cease to exist. A lot of people get a lot of this wrong for various reasons. I don't know what they are, so I'm not going to speculate about what those are. But when you take this back to the resurrection framework, and you say first resurrection, it's because it's first of two in the chapter. Pre-kingdom of trib saints and martyrs only, live and reign with Christ 1,000 years. Then he must reign until he hath put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy which shall be destroyed is death, which is the second death. Death and hell are cast into the lake of fire, along with everyone who never came to Christ or believed forward-looking to Christ in the Old Testament. There are huge spiritual implications with this, and it gets brought down to a much lower level of understanding when people just make it about the rapture or the church and when they're going to be resurrected. It's very much spiritual implication here of people who go into the 70th week because they weren't Christ's. Then they become Christ's, and the blessing is that they get resurrected to share the rule and reign with him alongside us for that 1,000 years. And then after the 1,000 years, every single unbeliever from all ages is going to meet their eternal they're going to begin their eternal torment, eternal suffering, which is absence from Christ in all ways and in any ways that could be torment. Mental, physical, spiritual, psychological, all of it for eternity, because that is what they chose in the absence of choosing for Christ. So, I understand that there are a lot of people who continually say that the church is part of the first resurrection. So we'll go back to that comment. I kind of got off on a little tangent here about the second death and how people simply don't understand it a lot of times, which is unfortunate, because not understanding the second death does no unbelievers any favors when you're trying to talk to them about the importance of believing in Jesus. Urgency, urgency, urgency. So going back to the first resurrection, obviously it's not the first ever. That's Jesus. Because he rose, we will rise too. It's not even the first since Jesus. Even if you could make a case that it does include the church, we believers in the present dispensation, even if you think that that's true, and that we are the first since Jesus, so it has to be us. Revelation itself negates that argument clearly and concisely in Revelation 11, because the two witnesses are resurrected during the sixth trumpet, which is 3.5 years before the first resurrection. So you can't make a case it's the first overall, and you can't make a case that it's the first since Christ. So the argument basically falls apart there, because, well, then what does first mean? It means first of two, because there are two in the chapter. And that's what the resurrection framework in 1 Corinthians 15 tells you, is that there are going to be three mentioned in the framework. And then there's one that falls outside of the framework, which is related to the church. And it's a hybrid event. It's a resurrection and a catching up at a specific stopping point, the end of the dispensation, the last trump. It's the last time the voice of Jesus will be used to call to assembly in the present dispensation before the commencement of the hereafter, which you note in Revelation 4 begins post-rapture. It's the space between the rapture and then all of the 70th week and then all of eternity and kingdom after that. The hereafter is actually post-rapture. The commencement of the hereafter. The first thing that you see is the rapture will have happened. So you're talking about the last trump being the end of the present dispensation and the hereafter commencing post-rapture. And what you note is that there is a group in Revelation 4, 5, and 7 makes it clear that they are redeemed, relocated from earth to heaven, and they are in glorified bodies, which means that there was a redemptive event, which included a resurrection and or change to glory, which is what 1 Corinthians 15 then goes on to tell you. So it sets the stage for a framework for understanding Revelation 20. And then it backs off and says, but there's this other group. Because remember, Revelation 20 makes it very stinking clear that the only people who participate in the first resurrection are folks who died. Not a hybrid event. Nobody is getting simply changed at that point. Not a single person is simply going to be changed to glory tied to the first resurrection. It is 100% dead people only, and they were those who came to faith and subsequently died for said faith within the confines of the 70th week. Which again, it clearly tells you in Revelation 20. We must pay attention to details. We can't just gloss over them and read what we want into these. There's a very huge misconception that, well, for post-tribbers or whatever, who think the rapture is going to happen at the second coming, that you would effectively be saying that there's no glorified people going into the kingdom. There would therefore be no repopulation. You would have no reason for a kingdom at that point, and you would just be able to move straight into eternity. There are no glorified people who will ever reproduce. The Bible very clear on that. So if the rapture happens at the second coming, then you have everyone being resurrected and people being changed to glory. All believers being changed to glory at that time. This is a self-defeating argument. A definitely not well thought out argument, but it also betrays the plain text to think that the rapture is going to occur at the first resurrection, because again, you're not talking about a hybrid event. And I think then you could also go down a huge rabbit trail about who the elect are that Matthew 24 talks about. It's the remnant of Israel. It's the remnant of Israel. But there's a whole bunch of rabbit trails that you go down, and fundamentally where this conversation really comes from is a misunderstanding of what first resurrection means. It's not first overall, that's Jesus. It's not first since Jesus, because even if you could make no other case, you've at least got the two witnesses in Revelation 11. They are a resurrection, and they ascend up to heaven in front of everyone. The 144,000 are taken with them. So you can't make a case that it's first overall or first since Jesus. That's not what that means, because Revelation obviously would countermand that argument. I probably selected the wrong word right there, but it would refute that argument. It is the first resurrection because it is the first of two in the chapter. There is one pre-kingdom, who is a starkly different group of people who are raised to life, and they again rule and reign with Christ for 1,000 years, alongside us, does not include us. And then there is a second resurrection, which is a resurrection to death, which is why it's called the second death. And they're going to be confined to the lake of fire eternally, because that's for unbelievers. And again, that's post-kingdom. So first resurrection is first of two, because again, there are two in the chapter. It's not first overall. It's not first since. I'm repeating myself in case anyone missed it the other 5 times I've said it, or 10 maybe. But this is an argument that, again, it's self-refuting when you actually look at the details and back up to things that have already happened in Revelation. It is an obviously self-defeating argument. And then again, you go back to, well, if the rapture is post-trib, then you're going to have everyone raised to glory and or changed to glory, and you'd have no one going into the kingdom in natural bodies to repopulate it, which would then make the prophecies about millennial kingdom and people being born in the millennial kingdom all liars. You can't have those two. They don't work together. They don't work. So really, I think where this stems from is a misunderstanding about what first resurrection means, and a failure to read the plain text and understand who that applies to. You can't properly understand the book of Revelation in its context if you are not a dispensationalist. I understand that there are people who hate that word and who hate dispensationalists and dispensationalism. Great. you are never going to be able to make the Bible work in its proper context, in its proper layout, if you don't understand dispensationalism. This is one of the ways in which that is evidenced.